So it's Friday, so it's time for Poets. Some of us know that as Push Off Early, tomorrow's Saturday. But in this context, it's the Perioperative Enhancement Team. Inspired by Dr. Sol Aronson and the team at Duke, a selection of clips to get us thinking about the next steps in providing world-class perioperative care. You'll find the full lectures in our back catalogue, or join us at the upcoming Perioperative Practicum for expert discussions, business case tips, and hands-on workshops. Go to www.ebpom.org and look for our international programme of perioperative practicums. Top Bed Talk.
This may be slightly controversial to some people, but I think it's a question that's sometimes raised, particularly in the UK, where you have a publicly funded healthcare system that has resource constraints. But given that we know that some modifiable risks confer adverse outcome, e.g. smoking, should we be more didactic in our approach to that and actually say, you know what, you can't have the surgery until you have modified that risk? Not just a piece of advice, but a bit more hard line.
It's a tougher
I don't agree with it necessarily, but it's an interesting point.
It's a perfectly fair question. It's definitely a tougher question to ask. I think it's responsible to ask it. I think it inevitably will lead to that conversation. For the time being, I think we could have that conversation in a high ground and way. And the other point that I would make is that the return, if you will, in any resource constraint environment, and that's equally true in the United States as it is in the UK, that you want to get the most value out of whatever you do because those resource dollars are so precious. There are times where patients will first connect or have a touch point to the healthcare system because they are now aware that they have to have surgery. So a lot of their chronic comorbidity conditions will be undermanaged or underrecognized or not recognized at all until they are having to confront the reality of surgery. And so many of the things we do, the return is more of a population health continuum than necessarily to be seen in the context of a narrow perioperative cut.
Yes.
Mike?
Yeah, no, I was actually going to raise the same issue. I think it is very controversial. I believe that it probably is the right thing to push patients to sometimes to modify risk factors to show that they're engaged in this just as much as we are, I think.
So you showed today, and I've heard it from you before, Sol, the analogy of the airport trying to land the planes. And, to land the plane properly, it's wheels down, flaps, doors to manual cross-check, etc., etc. So you showed a sort of list of modifiable factors and red switching to green with the idea that we don't land that plane, we don't go ahead with the procedure until we're ready. Now, the question, I have great idea, we all support that. And we know if we do that, complications are lower, healthcare is cheaper, results are better. We should all be motivated to do that. Human factors tell us that you're very unlikely to get all of those things to green in some people. Therefore, you're going to have to crash land the plane, okay? Which means
to really push the analogy.
Destroying my metaphor.
I think it's a great analogy because now you're cancelling other flights. You've got to get the foam on the runway. You've got to get the fire trucks out. You know it's going to cost 3 times more money, and you know it's going to suck more out of the healthcare system. So is that a conversation you eventually have with the patient and the payer to say, if we are really going ahead, we do understand this is a crash landing?
I think it's a brilliant, if you will, expansion of that metaphor. And it really circles back and ties nicely into where we began with a discussion of risk and how do you measure and quantify it. In short, I think the answer is yes. I think we need to be focused on making best efforts to turn red to green, if you will, in that sort of dichotomized sense of what is okay and what is not okay. Of course, we know that it's a continuum, and we do the best we can to get them past that sort of critical threshold of what we designate as high versus low risk or low versus high risk. At some point in time, you're going to communicate back to the endocrinologist or the hematologist or the nutritionalist, and they're going to tell you this is the best we can do. We've gotten something to represent improvement, and thank goodness and thank you for that opportunity to graduate them along that continuum toward healthiness. But this is the best we can do, and we aren't going to be able to get better. At that point, you make a judgment, and that's when you decide, should I dare land this plane, knowing that I have one wheel down but not two, or should I just simply say it's not a good idea to try to land the plane? But I think that's a responsible way to approach the problem.
And from to continue with this whole idea, we're recognising the fact that we are now going to land with only one wheel down. This brings us back to...
We're really just beating this metaphor to death.
I love it.
I just want to loop it back to the risk. Does that mean you can then more effectively communicate to the individual the risk of going ahead? Because that has to be personalised. And
yes.
You've got these fantastic electronic health records with all these details in. Can't you start to add greater fidelity to the risk within your organisation based on historical data? To tell me you're no longer a 0.5%, you're now a 5%.
Indeed, and I think that's exactly where the science of perioperative medicine is going. An example, it's a very hard objective example. We know, because we've done a retrospective dig of our data, of what would be the hemoglobin that would more likely than not portend a behavior to transfuse for any procedure. And we also know that if somebody spends 4 to 6 weeks getting infusion therapy, albeit iron or erythropoietin, that we can change that to a hemoglobin that would make it very unlikely to induce a behavior to transfuse. If we only had 2 weeks, to your point, urgent or emergent, versus 4 or 6, we could get some elevation of that hemoglobin, but maybe not to that goal where we stood. What we need to understand is at what point is some better than nothing, and what is the way we quantify some moreover than all. But I think your point is well taken.
Nick Aronson here. Thanks for listening to Top Med Talk. Now, before we let you go, it's important that we remind you to subscribe to Top Med Talk. That way you'll never, ever miss another episode. Also, if we could encourage you to join us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, pretty much every single social media platform, we're there. Join us. And finally, check out topmedtalk.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to email updates. That way we can always tell you where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and how you can join us. topmedtalk.com, and click on the section marked email updates. Finally, Top Med Talk is proud to act as the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about them as well. ebpom.org is their website. That's ebpom.org. And if you go to ebpom.org/meetings, you can find out about some of the wonderful meetings that we attend and cover across the year here on Top Med Talk. That's ebpom.org/meetings.